So I think this can be one of our most misunderstood sort of concepts. This touches in on freedom and responsibility because freedom is not a commodity that we give and take away. It's actually a capacity that we are nurturing within each child that we're trying to help reveal and nurture and support and develop.
Hello and welcome to the Voices in Montessori podcast, brought to you by the Greenspring Center for Lifelong Learning. My name is Tamara Sheasley Ballas, and in today's episode, we're talking about developing a culture of work in the elementary classroom. My guest today is Jamie Rue. Jamie is the head of school at Aiden Montessori School in Washington, D.C. Her career in Montessori education is now in its third decade and includes more than 15 years as a classroom teacher and school administrator and over 10 years as a trainer of teachers. She founded Rising Tide Montessori, an online resource center for Montessorians, and she consults and presents in the United States and overseas. She is an Association Montessori International AMI trainer, examiner, and consultant at the elementary level. So welcome, Jamie. So very excited to have you with us today.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks so much, Tamara.
Well, so let's dig right in because elementary Montessori is big work. And so talk to us first about what is work? What does work look like in the elementary Montessori classroom?
That's such a good question. I mean, it's so different from what work looks like in their prior stages of development. I mean, on the one hand, it's the same, right? We know that the primary work of a child at any stage of development is self construction. So that is definitely still happening in the elementary level. We're seeing them build themselves. We're lucky to be able to be supporting that sacred sort of creation of the adult that they're working on tirelessly. So it's still the same in terms of self construction, but because the characteristics have changed and this is a new child, there's been a rebirth, the work looks different and the work environment looks different. You know, so, you know, part of what they're learning is, I mean, part of what their work is in their to support their self-construction is that they are working in groups more. That's a characteristic that we know that they're drawn to group work. They have almost no skills in working together in groups, but we know they need to and they want to. So we have to support them in that. It is, I mean, the thing about work at this age is that um, yeah, I mean, concentration is still an important focus, but concentration looks different
Mm.
at this stage of development. You know, in the primary, we've really protected their concentration. We don't want anything to interfere with it. In the elementary, we do want to protect it to a certain extent, but also to be a functioning human in the world, they have to learn how to be concentrated and interrupted and concentrated. I mean, you and I were talking before this started, Tamara, about how much work we get done at home when we're not interrupted. But 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 in a lot of our days, even as adults, we have to be able to concentrate and get interrupted. So concentration looks different in the elementary as well. Um, what else? What else does work look like? I mean, it can be a time of reflection in the elementary is the work they need to be doing. So it doesn't look like much when we just observe a child. But there's a lot of integration that can be going on inside their brains that we don't see. It can be, you know, a scale model of the universe, uh, or it can be a really lively debate and discussion. So the way we view work, we have to be really careful not to just presume it's one thing, like, you know, producing a paper of a particular length or completing a certain amount of math problems or anything like that because uh, work can take so many different manifestations in the elementary. And I think that's one of the hardest things for us as adults who work with this age group that we feel so responsible and we sometimes get anxious and nervous and we start to demand to see things um, rather than observing and seeing maybe all the different ways that work is manifesting that isn't just paper and pencil.
So so let's say I'm a young teacher or even a seasoned teacher and I've got a class that is giving me a run for my money. And um what am I looking for? How do I know my classroom is working? How do I know that I'm building a culture of work? I know when I step into a children's house classroom, really ultimately I'm looking for three things, right? I'm looking for I'm looking for engagement in the work. I'm looking for joy in the classroom, and I'm looking to see a sense of purposefulness, like
Mhm.
that there's a sense of their own purpose in the space.
Yep.
Is there a secret recipe for the elementary classroom? Because I know for me, I walk in and I wanna see a buzz. I wanna hear the buzz. I want them to be talking to
Mhm.
each other. I wanna know that they're engaged.
Mhm.
What are you looking for?
I mean, the buzz for sure. If you walk into an elementary classroom and it's silent, the first thing I'm going to look at is the adult to think, what have you done to make this room silent? Because that usually it's not that it never just settles into silence in an elementary class. That can happen on occasion, but largely that's happening because of the an adult imposition, and that's not great. So it should be busy. They have to talk and communicate and connect. I generally look to see how many different subject areas are out and in use because ideally we're seeing, there's 8 areas of the classroom sort of that we have albums for. And ideally we're seeing 5 to 8 at any given time, in a classroom. So seeing that music is in use and art and if I go into a classroom that just has math and language out, that's not quite the culture of work that we want, ideally to be cultivating in the classroom. So um, the other thing you can see that I look for in my first 5 minutes in the classroom is like evidence that the children understand the systems and the expectations in their classroom. So I'll watch and see like how somebody like puts work away, how they clean up a workspace, how they engage with the teacher, or looking at some of those things that indicate that they understand that there's some clear systems guiding how the classroom, how the class works with each other, how they work together.
Mhm. So how do you know that they're learning what they need to learn?
So this goes into, I mean, I think at the elementary level, like with the 6 to 12-year-olds, again, we feel this intense sense of like responsibility because this is now official state recognized school, right? With standards and other things like that. So the nice thing is we do have the standards for whatever country or city or state or however your locale governs education, you have those standards to help guide. And so we do use those in a 6 to 12 classroom. The older the children are, the more we engage them in that. So we have here at Eden this year 7 6 years, and so they're engaged more with understanding those expectations because we just have so little time left with them. We want to make sure that they've engaged, and quite often they're beyond. In some areas, but for every child, there's always a little something that we might need to like dig in on and make sure that they feel confident and comfortable. So those standards help us to know. Now, generally, the ones that school districts and others focus on are math and language standards. So I really encourage everyone to be sure you have the arts and sciences standards as well. because they're important too. So we have that. We have the guide, the adult in the classroom, the teacher who is observing, who is planning lessons based on observations, and who is testing. I mean, when I talk about Montessori kids being the most tested um, of any children, because we test. If I'm giving a lesson and a sequence of lessons on the topic, let's say fractions or anything, the first thing I'm going to do in the next lesson is test to make sure that they have the information from the previous lesson. Okay, remember when we talked about raising fractions, who can show me what we did with that? And then we move on to our next thing. Um, if they don't know, then we go back and review that lesson again. So the guide, the adult paying attention and keeping careful notes on that is another key of how we make sure. And then with our individual meeting that we should be having with each child every week, 5 minutes, where we're checking in on what they've done. We're checking in on what they're interested in, where they want to go, if they need any more support in certain areas. But that is a powerful tool for relationship building and for having a sense of where they are and what they need.
Mhm. And so how how are you so you're taking all of this, you've got the basically the Common Core standards, and the students, which I completely believe in, are enrolled and know what the parameters are. It's their self-construction.
Mhm.
They hold it. And but then you have some students who may not be interested in really spending their time in the classroom focused. We've had students, particularly we find students who've come from other settings. I don't know if you all are enrolling students from the outside, but when they're asked to be responsible for their time in a way that they just haven't before,
Mhm.
they come in and they, y- you know, oh, I can choose what I do. Oh, well, can you talk about how you build that ethos of work where the expectation is they're forwarding themselves, they're enlightening themselves, they're self-constructing in the classroom, and what does that look like? How do you do that?
So I think this is one of our, I think, can be one of our most misunderstood sort of concepts. This touches in on freedom and responsibility because, like, freedom is not a commodity that we like give and take away. It's actually a capacity that we are nurturing within each child that we're trying to help reveal and nurture and support and develop. So Montessori actually makes a distinction about freedom and liberty. We have control over liberty, the external conditions that the child is working within. That's what we, the adults, have control over. The freedom is their own capacity. What our goal is to nurture that so they are truly free. And this requires the development of knowledge, right? So, like, I always use the example of, like, you can put a newborn infant on the floor and say, you're free to do whatever you want, walk, talk, eat, do anything, right? But they don't have the skills and knowledge and capacity to do that. So they're not free, right? And so the same is true for, say, a 6-year-old that comes into the elementary classroom. They're not free because they don't know anything about this room. They don't know the rules, they don't know the culture, they don't know the materials hardly at all. So they don't have freedom much at all. And when they first come in at 6, like, since they don't know any of this, they can't. They literally should, even coming from a Montessori environment, even the most well-developed will from a primary environment comes into the elementary environment and is not free because they don't know anything. They just don't know anything. They're a whole bunch of 6-year-old, like, they're like little puppies. They'll follow you wherever and they'll get distracted and whatever, but they need a lot of adult structure and support. Even straight from our Montessori primary classrooms. Because again, in order for them to be free, they have to have developed knowledge and understanding and capacity for it and skills. And they don't have very many yet. So that's why at the beginning of the year, in a 6 to 9 or 6 to 9, 6 to 12 classroom, you'll be those 6 year olds are kind of at the adult's hip for a good long chunk of time till they've had enough lessons. They're getting lessons all day long for several days till they have enough, till they start saying, hey, I want to go back to this. And you're like, yes, great. You three can do that. And I'll give these five a lesson. Right. And the same is true for any child that comes from outside of our of Montessori, which of course we want to welcome children because it's not their fault that they didn't know about Montessori when they were two, and we but again, not only do they not know anything about this environment, they haven't also had the really stellar experience of the development of the will in primary, which is really critical. So both of those things have to be nurtured, and that takes a lot of adult scaffolding and support. So that looks like for children that come in with no Montessori experience, they don't know how to choose their own work. Unreasonable for us to expect them to. It's a to be honest, a level of abandonment. We need to actually tell them what to do for a while, help them understand and see and witness, then start offering them two choices. You could do this or you could do this. When you do this one thing, come talk to me and I'll help you choose your next work. And maybe they've connected with a peer, but we have to wean them and we have to build their will slowly over time to get them ready to be able to do it. So it takes a fair amount of effort and energy from the adult, right? And it's not like how we were trained. We're trained to just leave them free to choose. But when children are new, it's not freedom to just leave them when they don't know what to do. They need lots and lots of choices. So
Can
I
I
think
s
that's
can I ask
yeah.
a question in there? So I'm gonna unpack, and I wanna actually follow this thread, down 2 different paths. The first path I wanna ask you about is, so you have some children, they just moved up, you've got this kind of pack, hopefully you've got 8 of them coming into a classroom who have just come up from their children's house classroom, or maybe 9, and where do you start with them? What are the lessons you're giving them? How are you supporting them in building? Because really, ultimately, you're building their sense of responsibility, you're building their knowledge of the classroom, and you're building their understanding of the expectations and the ethos of that classroom as well. So what does that look like? Can you take us through maybe what the first week might look like as you are onboarding these new lower L students?
Well, I can say one thing that in my own practice 25 years ago that I loved is that we had the first day of school was a half day for returning students only. And so I would get that good morning with my returning students in a lower L class in particular. I would just have my 7 and 8 year olds. And I would be able to spend a lot of time with them, tell them that September is the month to remember, and that my expectation is you're going to do a lot of remembering of things we did last year because I'm going to have to ignore you for the next week or so when the 6 year olds start. I mean, of course, you don't completely ignore them, but it does take a lot of energy to focus on the 6 year olds. You pull some 7 year olds into lessons, but so that was one schedule thing I really appreciated. Years ago for myself. But thinking of how you're going to support that in terms of the classroom culture, I think, there's a certain amount of getting them engaged and connected right away to something. So a lot of community building games to begin with on the first days and for the first week to help them get to know each other, turning the older ones loose when you can to start modeling the work that you kind of expect in the environment. And then I mean, I over plan, and when I train teachers too, like over plan and over plan and over plan of what you're going to do those first several days. So always have just a list of lessons and activities. And it can balance between academic lessons and um, just fun games or activities and things to keep them active because you're not going to be able to sustain an independent 3-hour work cycle the first several weeks of school. And nobody, I don't care how established your classroom is, you shouldn't expect that right away the first week of school in September, or whatever, August. Um, so over planning and plan the day out by the minute. So that, I remember my first year of teaching, I was super idealistic, of course. I thought, so excited. I had over planned. I had this little project for them that I had dedicated 15 minutes to. And 30 seconds into a project, this 6-year-old, I, I could see him, even though this was the 26 years ago. He came up to me. He's like, I'm done. And I'm like, no, 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 no. We have 14 minutes and 30 seconds left on this activity, sir. You are not done. You have to sit back down and do some work on this particular thing I told you to do because you have been here for like 45 seconds. You don't know how to do anything. So we have to plan and then be open, right? So plan two things so that when that little guy gets done, you can hand the next thing to him. Decorate your work folder. I used to have name tags that I had the children write their name on and they could decorate. And then those tags they could give to me when I was busy in a lesson or something, they could leave it so that I knew I would get a little stack and I would go back and find them when I was done. Of course, my first question always to children when they need help from me is, have you asked every other human in this room for help before you've come to me? No? Goodbye.
I've never heard it that way before.
Have you have you asked every other person? Nope. No. Okay. I will see you when you have. Um, Maybe less so with the new 6-year-olds, but with everybody else, yeah. So that's part of it, and trying to get lessons that have like interesting follow-up work. So we might do fundamental needs chart, and then the children can make their own charts, and that's something that can get put away and brought back out as they finish it. Um, Booklets for the types of polygons or something like that. So trying to find balancing the work choices throughout those first few days and the lessons that you give to this big group of 6-year-olds, balancing it between stuff that doesn't have any like ongoing follow-up work and then some things that you can go back to check, because you also are trying to develop that habit of like, okay, you've had this lesson, you've worked on follow-up work for a little while, but now you're getting another lesson, so you're putting that away because you come when you're invited unless you have a strong reason not to. And then, oh, well, you have a minute of free time. Why don't you go back to your unfinished work folder and take a look and see what you could work on right now? So all of this helps to build that sort of, you're starting to train them in the sort of culture of the classroom. So 6-year-olds get anywhere from like 4 to 8 lessons a day early on, because otherwise, how do they have anything to do? Because they don't know anything, because they just got there. So they really have to get a lot so that within the first week and a half in the classroom, then they've gotten a lot they can choose from. And they know they've gotten this rhythm of how you work and then go back to work that's not finished and all of that. So you're well on your way of really establishing a habit. But I think one thing I see happens all too often for teachers is that they maybe don't give enough lessons to those new kiddos, that really just need a lot in that first week, week and a half. And you, of course, can start sneaking in because you can get like, okay, this group's going to finish their fundamental needs charts, and this group is doing, noun work. And so I could take these three and these two older ones, and I could do this lesson really quick. And there are ways you still can get in and connect with your older students, but it really pays off to take that week, week and a half at the beginning and really get those younger ones plenty to choose from.
That's so helpful. And then with your transfers, they're coming from outside Montessori. I'm assuming it's somewhat similar. Is there
Mhm.
anything that is different or that you work on specifically?
I think for them, it's pretty similar, but I think the one thing is, you do sometimes have to, like, acknowledge with them how different this is, and how and help them feel okay with that being different, like, and recognize that it is a different sort of experience all around. So I think there's just some conversations like that, um, to support them. But yeah, um, once they all have enough to do, some of that work culture and that ethos then develops because they've had enough offered to them and enough practice. You've demonstrated to them. Because if we, on the other hand, if we just give them the same amount of lessons you would give a totally like settled classroom, then that might be 1 or 2 lessons a day. But then on day two, what are they supposed to do if they only get 2 lessons? And they had 2 lessons the day before. But maybe two of them, it's like there's not, maybe it's the great story, the first great lesson. So they don't have like, and so we really have to be sure, like, otherwise, if we only give them the 1 or 2 a day that they'll get once they're settled, you're actually not going to get them settled because they don't have enough to do. And they sit around and they draw or they fall out of their chair or they meander. And then they're learning the habits you don't want them to learn. But it's not totally their fault because if they've only had 2 lessons, what are they supposed to do? Practice the noun for like 6 hours? That's boring, right? Like they need, like, nobody wants to do that. I don't even want to do that. And I'm a grammar nerd, right? So that's part of the challenge is that we do have to be sure they have plenty to choose from early on so that the work habits and the energy we want to see develop has the opportunity to develop. Otherwise, all those habits we don't like sneak in.
Okay, so what about the little guy who doesn't want any lessons? You get the child who's either coming up and could have be overwhelmed by the space, or you get someone from the outside, and we have that sometimes, right? We have the child who says, you say, "Oh, I'm going to give you a lesson on, you know, the noun grammar box, whatever." And no, thank you.
So that's part of the system building, even on the first day, about some of the expectations, which is when you're invited to a lesson, you are welcome to have a conversation with the adult about why you might not want to come. But the expectation is you're going to come unless you've negotiated otherwise. Right. And so, someone who doesn't like it's all the 6 year olds are coming to a lesson right now. So you don't have a choice. And this is where, like, again, it's not, I mean, this child doesn't have any freedom yet because it doesn't know what to do. And so it's not that I'm impacting their freedom because they don't have any. In fact, I'm trying to support their freedom by having them come to a lesson. Right. Um, so it's just, nope, everybody's coming. You can just sit right here and not do anything if you want, but you're going to sit right here. Like, and that little guy might be the one that needs to just be by my side most of the day. So I've had kiddos that struggled to engage in work and who struggled to choose work. And so they just became my partner for a day or two. You're just going to come to everything I give, whether or not it's for you, until you tell me you're ready to go and get something that is going to engage your interest. I mean, the other trick I've done, like, for a child that doesn't wanna come is sometimes I might say, "Okay, that's fine," and then if I was just gonna if it I would switch my lesson to something exciting, perhaps involving science or, like, mixtures or anything I could, do it right next to that child and just look at them. "Aw, I'm so sorry you didn't join I'm so sorry you didn't join us. Isn't this a bummer?" So that's another thing you can do for those kiddos that are reluctant, but if it's the beginning of the year, just scoop them all up. It's just not a choice.
And I think being clear from the beginning that clarity is kindness.
Mhm.
And the clarity of, we need you to have all of these lessons so we can give you more freedom
Yep.
to make
Yep.
choices. But right now, if I don't give you this lesson with all your friends, you're not going to have it, and it's actually going to slow you down.
Yeah.
So you want to join these, and then I promise you there are gonna be areas that you have a lot more choice in a couple
Yep.
weeks. So come along with me. You gotta, it's building that sense of trust
Yep.
at the
Yep.
beginning so they know that they can trust you. Do you wanna talk
Yep.
about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge well, first, I'm gonna say I have here in my office all the time, Clear is Kind
Clear
from
as
Brené
kind. Thank you, Doctor Brene Brown.
because it is, and we have to apply that to children as well, right? But, like, not being clear with them out of a misplaced desire to protect or something is actually it's not respectful and it's not kind. So it's really important to be really clear with them. Um, what was your question again, Tamara? Or what?
Oh, well, really, I was talking about building trust
Oh, the
when
trust.
they
Yeah.
don't have that trust coming in. And
Yeah.
some of them have been environments where, candidly, you or I wouldn't have trusted the adult in that environment
Mhm.
either. And so they're
Mhm.
coming in and their nervous system may be locked down and they may have quite a bit of work they need to do to,
Yeah.
to be able to trust.
I mean, I think for all the children, one of the things I mean, especially at the 6 to 12 level, is that one of the things we know for children this age is they're primed for hero worship, and they are gonna be really inclined generally, absent some, traumatic experiences, gonna be inclined to trust the adult. In some ways, I had a colleague once who taught upper elementary for a long time and then went to lower elementary, and she said, "6-year-olds scare me. They trust anybody without any adult. They're so excited about them, and it's, like, a little frightening, that they will, 'cause, like, they have that tendency." But part of it is to just I mean, it's helping them to see that, they're older, this is a different environment, you're here to engage in with them in that way, so you have to be fun. You have to be authentic as an adult with 6 to 12-year-olds in particular because, they can tell when you're not, and then they don't have respect for you. So authenticity is a big important thing. So I've coached teachers. I years ago was coaching a teacher who I'd known and knew for a while, and I talked with him, and I was like, what what I'm concerned about is why aren't you being yourself with the class? Like, you're so funny and so much fun, and it feels like you're, like, holding yourself you're not quite being yourself, and that's impacting your relationships with them, and so that's a big thing, and, it's important to especially at the beginning of the year, to be extraordinarily, like, firm and consistent with systems and boundaries and rules and expectations. Especially for the new ones, they're gonna grow to trust you when they see you're consistent and that you're there to enforce the rules, that you're there to pay that you're watching and you're paying attention. Once you've established that with children, you can be more flexible with rules. Like, they'll see that you're watching something and not intervening, and they'll be like, "Oh, there's a good reason for this, like, I trust." But for a child that doesn't know you, if they see that there's some behavior going on that you're just allowing to happen, that actually makes them not trust you. Like, you need to show that you're gonna defend the work culture really vigorously. And so that requires, at the beginning of the year in particular, the adult has to be on top of everything, just on top of everything. Don't let anything fly. It establishes the culture, it shows them you'll defend it, and it builds that trust in all those children that are new that don't know you as well. So, but fun's a big part of it. You have to be fun. You have to have fun. You have to laugh. Children should go home every day feeling happy that they've had a great engagement. You should have connected with every child every day. Like, all of that builds trust
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
maintains trust.
And maintains trust, and maintains trust. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the youngers coming in to a setting. Let's talk about now. Actually, before I go there, let me ask you for upper L, is there any difference? I mean, because you're starting there, they're in our community, the lower L and the upper L are separate. So
Mhm.
you've got fourth, fifth, and sixth graders in a separate classroom. or 4th and 5th in some schools. So is there a difference on how, 'cause you're not having them on your hip quite the same way. What does that
Mm-mm.
look like? Like, really establishing that ethos of work right out of the gate for those 4th graders who are moving
Mhm.
up and who are used to ruling the roost in their lower elementary classrooms and knowing how really adding to leadership in kind of extraordinary ways.
Yeah.
And then how do you bridge that for them?
I think, I mean, it is easier in lots of ways. Like they do come in, I mean, they do come in and they're young because those sixth graders are suddenly starting to look quite big and act big. But they have the general culture of work. Ideally, we're grateful to our lower elementary practitioners for really spending a lot of time on that. I remember my, like, 2nd year of teaching, I went to the classroom next door to mine, who was my mentor, and she taught the upper L, and I was like, "I can't even, like, I taught all these people stuff last year, and nobody remembers anything, and all I do all day is resolve conflicts and give grace and courtesy lessons," and she said, "Yes, Jamie, and I'm reaping what you sow." Like, it
Mm.
comes out in the upper elementary, so it's super important to do that in lower L. Um, but I think, uh, one thing to be, I think, really clear on in the upper elementary is that even though they're older, we still have to be really firm and clear about systems and expectations. I took over the upper elementary class kind of 2 days before school started many years ago because we had some personnel changes that happened right before school, and so I started the year thinking, "Oh, these kids are older, I can be more chill," and I paid for that for the rest of the year because I gave them way too much, um, freedom. I mean, I gave and, didn't have high enough expectations, and I had to really try to claw that back all year long. So I think the biggest thing is we have to be really clear, really firm, the same sort of expectations from the get go. And for those fourth years, they really need to see that the stakes are a little higher, the expectations are higher. Like you don't get to just make 17 maps without like increasing the difficulty and so forth. So I think that's a big component is we have to stretch them beyond and stretch their work and elevate it pretty consistently so they don't just stay. So that's a big thing. Like, be as strict about the systems and upper and the expectations, and be really. This is a time when they can hear feedback more. So I want to give you some feedback, and I'm going to give you this feedback because I know you can take it and do something with it, and I have confidence in that. So I want to talk to you about this piece of work and how I think you can improve, right? Um, and that kind of work with those 4th through 6th graders, modeling even more so with the 6th graders and the 4th years are going to see it, but also scaffolding them in, really high quality work. I felt, bad for my children sometimes where, the second they achieved something, I was like, okay, so now let's bring it up here. Like we didn't ever just sit and enjoy for very long because I was like, well, if you can do that, then we're going to do
Next
this.
thing. Well, but I think that's an important component, and it's something that I see sometimes gets missed in Montessoris, where there we understand the need for independence and autonomy in the human being, but we maybe are not as, I don't know, we don't have in the forefront of our minds maybe in the same way the need for the worthy challenge. And
Mhm.
the research shows, and this comes out of Joanne Deek's work, Dr. Joanne Deek, but that the worthy challenge is how we build self-esteem in in
Mhm.
in human beings,
Yeah.
overcoming the worthy challenge. And yet so many children, I think it's a part of why we're seeing such high rates. It's a piece of the puzzle of anxiety and depression because the work doesn't necessarily have meaning, and and they don't get to have that valorization moment. They don't get to have that moment where they just did the thing and it was really hard and it required they sweated and they failed a couple times and they picked themselves up and they really got to be stretched, which was the word
Yeah.
you used. And
Yep.
I really want to underscore this because it's an area I think that we're in a culture that oftentimes, and I don't have all the words on this. I'm still chewing on this as a concept, but that often really elevates comfort
Mhm.
rather than teaching children how to deal with disappointment and discomfort. And it is uncomfortable when we don't know how to do things. I still have that. When I have parent
Same.
situations or staff situations, I'm like, I don't want to do this job anymore. Somebody else going to do it. It's too hard. Like
Right.
it's very confronting. And
Yeah.
so I think it's really important. I want to underscore this that the gift is to give the child something that they can really chew on that requires their whole being, their whole self, their whole engagement so that then and that it is not easy straight out of the gate. And that's the work that builds their character. It's the part that builds them, that makes them strong for the world that that carries they carry with them for the rest of their lives. And so it's that we call it in our school community the gifts of a worthy challenge. And
Mhm.
I really think it's important that we remember, yes, we want them to be the ideal is that they're inspired by it and that we can meet them right at that moment where they have that interest. And I know Dr. Montessori talks about, that culture is really the soul of the curriculum and the math and the language are, the tools to give us access
Mhm.
to that soul and that spirit. And that is so very important. And we can't just give them things to do that are easy.
No.
And and sometimes it means teaching them. I just was in a children's house classroom the other day, and I know it's not the exact same thing, but this little guy, I'm stepping in for a few days while I have a guide who's out. So I was in, and this little guy, he's 3, and I said, "Do you wanna do the button frame?" Now, I haven't been in a classroom for a long time, so I did ask the question. He's like, "No, I don't wanna do that." And I said, "Oh my goodness." Well, "Do you have any buttons on your clothes?" And he looked, he had no buttons. I said, "Well, do you see my shirt? I've got 6 buttons, and you will know how to do these buttons after you've had this lesson." He's like, "Oh, well, okay, I'm definitely," like that now he's interested in the
Mhm.
lesson. Then we get into so he had to be enrolled, first of all. Like, why would it be important? Why does it have meaning? Why is it
Mhm.
purposeful? And then he does I give the lesson and he unbuttons all the buttons, and then he gets to buttoning them, which is way harder, and he's like, "This is hard. I'm gonna do it tomorrow." And I said to him, "I just need you to know that tomorrow, it's still gonna be hard. And
Mhm.
it'll be hard the next day and the next day if you don't practice. But if you actually sit here and work on it and practice it, I bet you by the end of today, it won't feel hard anymore." Because he had not, right? He didn't know that. And he
Yeah.
needed somebody to actually articulate that because he's in a culture that reveres comfort and ease. And so he looked at me and I give him a lot of credit because I just knew him from that day, really. And he went and he came back and it was all done up, and he said, "I did it 2 times." I said, "Oh my goodness. That's
Amazing.
that's amazing, right?" And then he went and undid it, and he put he put the dressing frame on his head. So he was done. He was toasted. That was all he
Yeah.
had to give,
Yeah.
right? But it was I had to help him see the value, first of all, of the work, and then also help him understand what it meant to do something hard because
Mhm.
those were new skills for him.
Yeah. Yes.
So
I mean, I think this is something I've been wrestling with for a while. And, my kids are now adults, graduated from graduate school and undergrad and everything. but when they first got to college, both of them experienced young adults, 18-year-olds and their peers who had never had to navigate discomfort or failure by themselves. And I tell parents that now, like, it's you don't want your kid to do that for the first time when they're 18 and away from home and exposed to drugs, alcohol, and anything else, right? You want them to have experience while you're there to nurture and support them through discomfort and failure. And so it's not that we're going out and intentionally giving our children opportunities to fail, although I confess I have deliberately not stepped in my as a parent
Of
and
course.
knowing that they were gonna fail. But we do I mean, they need practice and guidance and skills. We help them learn how to tie their shoes. We need to help them process discomfort because they are not gonna be comfortable or happy all the time. And alone in a dorm room at 18, before the prefrontal cortex is fully formed, is not the place you want your kid experiencing those things. And so it has to start early, all the way through parenting, from the get go. And then, I mean, I love that story about that child too, because I think when children haven't been exposed to like trying again and doing something that's hard, what I hear from a lot of our kiddos sometimes is, I'm tired. I'm too tired when
Yes.
something is
Yes.
too. And
Yes.
I say things like, well, you can do things even when you're tired. Like, I'm tired all the time. I still manage to, but helping them see how they can do these things and helping them get some of that perseverance because it isn't as much. I think there's this sense in our parenting culture now that it's important for our child to be happy and comfortable all the time. And that's just kind of pervasive. And so they may not have, parents sometimes feel like that's what they should be doing to be a good parent. They should be like making sure your child never feels uncomfortable or anything. But in fact, like self-esteem and self-confidence and all of that grows from overcoming like obstacles and difficulties on their own and having honest relationship with adults in their lives because like a part back to that trust thing too, like with an elementary child, like, if I am not honest with them about their work, if they come and ask me what I think of it or they wanna talk about it, and they know it's not their best work or they know it's not high quality, and I just say, "Oh, you wow, it's so lovely." That that impacts our relationship because they know I'm not being, like, honest with them. So it's important for relationships too, as well as that self-esteem and that ability to persevere, that resilience, all of it.
And it's what I mean, the way we hold them is oftentimes the way they're also gonna see themselves of what they're
Mhm.
capable of, right?
Mhm.
So, our belief in them, like my belief in that child at that moment, right, we knew he could do it, but it does we have to see the child as the man, as Dr. Montessori told us, the man or the human that they're gonna become
Yep.
and hold them to that standard, and of course with kindness and with clarity and with firmness, which I think those are the pieces that can sometimes get blurry for
Yes.
people.
Yep.
And it
Yeah. But I think again, I mean, relationship building is at the center of that. I mean, when you know a child or you know how you can connect with them and pull them along and they feel trusting and they're more willing to do that. And also just like really, public expectations around these things. We're a classroom that checks our spelling. We're a classroom that,
mm,
does 2 drafts before we call something finished, I mean, again, with 6 and 7-year-olds, we're not gonna check spelling because we don't want anything to get in the way of their writing. We're not gonna do it so directly, but you can still build a culture. You can build all those things of as a part of the culture. We're a classroom that celebrates our mistakes, and what we learned from it, that doesn't yeah, it feels I mean, we'd all rather not make mistakes, but we all will. Um, so all of that goes into that culture. that you're developing in your classroom that you have to work really intentionally and painstakingly on. It's more important than any of the academic lessons you give, the culture that you really intentionally build. I see teachers sometimes jumping directly, oh, they got to get the Common Core lessons, they got to get these things, they got to know this, they got to know that. But if that's the focus, and the sort of classroom culture takes, a second to that, if it is the trained adult, the lead teacher in the classroom that really has to lead all of it. And it's a big responsibility for the teacher. Um, but it has to happen because otherwise then you're in a constant, you're not going to have the culture you want because you've only focused on these academic things and you haven't focused on the culture. Like, of course, it's not going to develop.
Mhm. And what do you do, and I know we don't have so much time left, but just, maybe one more question. What do you do when you have a student who may be costing the rest of the room that culture? You know, you've got they maybe they're a social butterfly, maybe, and they're kind of going around and getting things spun up a bit, or you might have a child who is newer to Montessori, or even a child who comes up struggling with some of the foundational academic skills to be successful in the elementary classroom. Can you talk about those kind of outliers and supporting them within the Montessori classroom, the elementary?
So, yeah, like, I mean, we are always going to have children who struggle in some way or another. I mean, that's the nature of working with human beings. And so, I mean, we have to apply our principles in the same way. When you think about Montessori with that first group of children in San Lorenzo that she worked with, right? She did not have the normalized classroom as her outcome or goal, right? At all. She truly was meeting them, or, she and the teachers who were working with her, meeting them where they were. So they were dirty and needed to be cleaned. So she, in the whole, sort of plaza there, put out basins and cakes of soap and they washed themselves all at the same time. A whole class thing, right? And I look back on that kind of anecdote before. So then she discovered you can get a classroom that's normalized, that's settled, and the children are functioning more like their natural way instead of the way society imposes on them. All of those things, right? And then we all sort of strive for that. We're like, that's what we need. We need to get the class settled. Everybody's got to be working. But actually, what we should be doing every year as the adults is being like Montessori was with her first group and saying, who are these children? What do they need from me? What do they need from each other? And then we provide that. So if you have a child that's struggling to settle into work, it could be you assign them a single workspace because we always have single, and they have to do a piece of work, check in with you, get another one, check in. And that worked on religiously can really help some children. It could be someone who's just at your hip for a while and coming to every lesson because that's what they need. It could be somebody who has a daily individual meeting instead of a weekly one because that's what they need. It could be somebody who you have to talk with administration or someone else about this child needs a little extra support for right now, and is there any staff member that could help out for an hour or two or whatever you need a day to help with some settling and organization. But I think the big thing that's important for us in our mindset as the adults in there is to not think this child is lacking, but to think, okay, what does each individual child here need from me? Here's all these kids that are good to go and they can maintain the work culture. And we've got these one or two that need some help. How can we provide that? How do we do that? How do we engage? What we become, um, we experiment like Montessori did. Remember her first casa had toys and nobody, played with them. And they got all these donated wealthy toy, amazing toys. Um, we experiment. If this isn't working for this child, all right, what's going to work better? Or is a little more structure necessary? I know it gets really frustrating. I remember I started a little wildflower school, I guess 4 years ago this fall. So I was back in the classroom for a couple of years. And it's exhausting, and these were kids coming out of COVID, and so there was all sorts of dysregulation um, and all sorts of joy and all sorts of fun if I pull back on my, like, "Oh, it should be this way," and instead say, "Okay, who do I have here?" And I can say in that group too, mid-year, there were a group of them that still were struggling to work, and there were 7 or 8 that we sat for 2 weeks. They all sat, we put a big table together, they all sat there, and there was always an adult with them, and they all
Hmm.
got the same lessons, and they had to do the follow-up work, and the adult did the follow-up work with them, and for 2 solid weeks, we did that to, like, build a stronger sorta work culture, and a couple of them got to peel off because they started to show they could do work. So there are different things you can do to support when you need to. It doesn't have to be, you know, y- I encourage people to have some creativity with that. But yeah, I locked down about 7 or 8 of them. For-
And did it work?
yeah, I mean, to varying degrees. Yeah, to
Mhm.
varying degrees, depending on the individual. Some people just still need, I mean, this is something I've been saying around here lately. I hear your words are saying you don't need me. But your behavior is telling me a different story. And so your
Mm.
behavior is telling me that you need more support from me. And so, some of them still told me that through their behavior, but some did. Some got some good solid work habits out of it.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, Jamie, this has been it's been such a pleasure. I wanted to have you on the podcast since I think we started. I think we've been talking to you about it, and I'm so happy to have you here today, and really so much good to take away today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. This has been such a pleasure, such a treat to talk with you too. We don't live very far from each other, but we don't get to connect very often. So, a real treat. Thank you so much.
I just want to thank our listeners for spending your time with us today. Take a look at our website at greenspringcenter.org to view the show notes from today's episodes. We have links to Aiden Montessori School and Rising Tide Montessori on the show notes page of our website. And we should also add your podcast, Jamie, that you were telling me about. I don't know if we have that. Well, can you share that with the listeners?
Yeah, all things Montessori.
Great.
So,
Perfect. So that's another great resource for you all as you're doing this important work. And listeners, we invite you to subscribe to the podcast, hear the latest episodes, and join in the conversation on Facebook and Instagram. As Dr. Montessori told us, an education capable of saving humanity is no small undertaking. And we agree. We are in this together. Thanks for the important work you do. It's the most important work, and we'll see you next time.